Shalom again, my friends. This is Yehudi Yisrael with another video on our friend Dr. Michael Brown. Now, this is the same show that I did a video about, but there was a caller who called in named Joel. And I want to really emphasize that I want to give honor to Joel in recognizing that it takes a lot of guts to call into Dr. Brown's show. So kudos to you, Joel, for calling in and trying to reason with Dr. Michael Brown. Now, saying that, I want to give a little bit of constructive feedback because yes, did I make a video saying that I wanted to challenge Dr. Brown to a debate, to at the very least to engage with the material that I've shown on this channel to refute him? Yeah, absolutely. Is that going to happen? I don't know. Probably not. He doesn't seem like he's going to engage with me because either he's scared to engage in the debate, since I seem to be one of the few that interacts with him directly, aside from Rabbi Yisrael Blumenthal and Moshe Shulman in a more private setting, but also because I'm not a leader of the community. So the best thing we can do, if he's not going to bite and he's not going to take up my challenge to debate, is to empower the viewer, empower you guys to be like Joel, to call into the show and to give Dr. Brown a dose of truth of the Tanakh. Now, that being said, like I said, I want to go through this video to try and give a little bit of constructive feedback to show how we can perfect, and so that any of you can call into the show and put Dr. Brown in his place. So let's start the video.
Let's try another Joel. Joel in Liberty, Texas. Welcome to the Line of Fire.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Brown, I'm calling you in reference to the debate you had with Rabbi Singer. And during that debate, Rabbi Singer brought up Isaiah 53:10. His days will be long and he will see seed.
Mm-hmm.
His days will not be eternal, they will be long. And then he quoted Psalm 90:10, saying he would live more than 70 years. Seed, to me as a Jew and everyone I know, means sons, which means that Messiah will marry, live past 70 years, have sons, and then in Ezekiel, if I'm going too far, let me know, but in Ezekiel, it is clear that he will build the third and eternal temple.
So Joel's putting out his argument here, and he's sort of going on the offensive, talking about the famous Isaiah 53:10 verse, right? Which says that the servant is going to prolong, he's going to have seed, he shall see children, right? And it says Zerah there, so like a lot of counter missionaries like to use this argument to say, well, Jesus didn't have any children, right? So it's a very offensive take from the beginning. Personally, it's not the approach that I use, simply because of the fact that it sort of gives the Christian the opportunity to, they like to talk about metaphorical seed. They use some references in the Tanakh that seem to if there's one exception to a rule, the Christian is just going to jump on that and just, you give them an inch, they will take a mile. And I think there might be one or two exceptions to the idea of metaphorical seed. And so Christians will just hang on to that for dear life. So personally, this isn't the approach that I use. And you'll see how Dr. Brown tries to deal with it. I like that this caller, though, brought in the third temple reference. I don't think that's something that Dr. Brown wants to deal with, but he does mention in Ezekiel that it speaks of the third temple. And I know that in the book of Ezekiel, chapters 40 through 48, Dr. Brown has a very muddy answer to that. So I like that he brought that up. But of course, Dr. Brown's going to skirt the issue. But he's referencing also in Ezekiel 37, which is clearly a messianic prophecy. It says that my sanctuary is going to be established forever, right? It says, I will place my sanctuary in their midst forever. So it has a mixed bag of arguments that I think definitely have some level of merit, but I certainly wouldn't start off with the prolonged offspring argument. And you'll see why in a second.
All right, so let's break it down. Yeah, let's just break it down, okay? And thank you so much for the question. All right, number one, does it first say he's going to die explicitly in Isaiah 53? Die and be buried. Explicitly.
No, it doesn't say that. It says he will not live eternally.
No. It doesn't say that. You just made that up.
Okay, tell me what it says.
It says...
I have it in front of me.
Okay, just start reading in verse 3. Isaiah 53.
No, you go ahead, sir.
No, sir, go ahead. Start reading Isaiah 53, verse 3. Go ahead.
No, sir, I'm talking about Isaiah 53:10.
So... this is definitely not the way that I would go about it, right? And this is the reason why I don't go about the, seeing children and prolonging his days from the get-go is because of exactly what Dr. Brown is doing, right? He's trying to get the caller Joel to focus on the idea of the servant dying for the sins of others, right? Because it talks about the servant being crushed, right? It explicitly states that the servant is, oppressed and afflicted, and that he's going to be crushed, and he was crushed because of our iniquities. So he's just going to focus on that. And that's sort of more of a stalemate. And we're not going for a stalemate. We're going for a checkmate, right? Yeah, you have this idea on some level, right, that you're going to have a servant that is going to have offspring and children, but then you also have this idea in the servant songs of Isaiah of a servant dying or being crushed or suffering, right? My approach is to lean into that. The idea of Israel being the servant, we don't want to shy away from that and say, well, the servant suffers and dies, but not really. The servant also lives. Like, you want to play both ends of that because that's literally what the song says, right? You can't say that, well, Israel can only have long days and have children and then ignore the part where it says that the servant dies and suffers. Because if Israel is the suffering servant, then we have to incorporate that into it. It's not just one individual. So what's the problem with saying, okay, well, the servant dies, right? Especially with the idea in Ezekiel where it talks about, in Ezekiel 36, where it speaks about the resurrection of the dead, right? Or maybe, yeah, I believe it's Ezekiel 36 where it speaks about that, right? So, or actually, no, it's 37 here, right? The Valley of the Dry Bones. It's right there in the chapter, right? So we can still say Israel is the servant and then say, okay, so then there'll be a resurrection at the end of days. And I think a lot of Jews are afraid of doing that because they think, oh, it sounds too much like Jesus. Remember, it's okay to say that resurrection is a Jewish concept. It doesn't mean that we're admitting that Jesus is the Messiah or that Jesus is the suffering servant. This way, you don't end up in a stalemate gridlock with Dr. Michael Brown, because all we have to do to refute Dr. Brown's position on Isaiah 53 is prove that somebody else other than the Messiah suffers and dies for the sins of Israel and the nations, right? That's all we have to do, right? Checkmate. The goal of the game isn't to, in the game of chess, the goal of the game isn't to take all the other person's pieces. The goal of the game is to make the king so that he has nowhere to move and he's trapped. That's what you want to do to Dr. Brown.
Start reading in Isaiah 53, because
Sir,
I said
I'm not
first.
going to do that. I've asked you a question. Sir, I've asked you a question respectfully, and I'm asking for your answer.
All right, let's try this again. Okay? Let's try this one more time.
All right.
Does the text first say, Isaiah 53, that he will die and be buried?
I don't recall it saying that.
Okay, so start reading Isaiah 53, verse 3 for context. Go ahead.
Sir, I don't have it in front of me now. I'm talking to you.
All right. So, you said you had it in front of you, so I'm going to read to you, okay? Isaiah 53, starting in verse 3. I love the question. Everything's bogus here. Every part of it's bogus. So let's start. Verse 3, Isaiah 53, 3. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain, like one from whom people hide their faces. He was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. Yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, but then the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away, yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Okay, so Joel, that's verses 3 through 9. It's told us he will.
Now, sir.
Excuse me. It says that he will be killed, that he will die, and he will be buried.
So exactly what I just said, right? If you go starting out from, let's prove that the servant is going to be, have long days and have, children and that sort of thing, even if you play into the idea of it being about the Messiah, which isn't a problem, right? Because that's exposing you to the idea that the song also speaks about the servant suffering and potentially dying. So I think, Joel, if you were to call in again, I wouldn't fight him on the idea that the servant can die and suffer, right? It's fine to say that as long as you're looking at it from the perspective of Israel being the servant, right? You can go to Psalms, right? And you can see explicitly where it talks about the remnant, right, of Israel. It says, all this has befallen us, and we have not forgotten you, nor have we betrayed your covenant. Our heart has not turned back. Our steps have not turned away from your path. So this is clearly speaking about the righteous among Israel. Even when you crushed us in place of serpents, right? Then you compare that with Isaiah 53, right? He was pained because of our transgressions, crushed because of our iniquities, and the chastisement. It fits like a glove with if you use Psalm 44 regarding the righteous remnant, who even Dr. Brown in the previous video that I did, he admits this is about the righteous remnant, yet it fits like a glove. That's all you need to debunk Dr. Remember, we're going for the checkmate. We're not going for taking all of his pieces and then ending in a stalemate. If you're familiar with how chess works, right? We want to trap him so that he has no way out. And this is the way you do it, right? He can't deny that this is about the remnant here. It's not talking about a blind, deaf, deceitful servant. It's talking about righteous people who are being crushed by God. It says, if we forgot the name of our God and spread our palms out to a strange God, will God not search this out? For he knows the secrets of the heart. So it's proving this is the remnant. This is a righteous group of people who have not betrayed the covenant. It is for your sake that we are killed all the time, that we are considered as sheep for the slaughter. How much more about Isaiah 53 can this scream? It screams suffering servant. And it's even God is we're being killed for the sake of God, the righteous among us, right? How does that not fit with Isaiah 53? Right? It pleased the God. It pleased God to bruise him, right? We are killed for the sake of God. It fits with Isaiah 53. The remnant, not just the Messiah. That's the approach I would take. That's the checkmate. Don't worry about prolonging the days and, oh, Jesus doesn't fit with this. You're not going to convince them that Jesus doesn't fit. But they cannot run away from the fact that the remnant fits, at the very least. They want to say Jesus is among that remnant? Go ahead. But that proves that Isaiah 53 is not a good proof text for the Messiah. And they have to stop using it as, oh, look, who is it speaking about? Clearly, if you go to Psalms 44, it fits like a glove with the remnant. Let's keep going.
Okay, that's what it says. Very explicitly. Very explicitly.
May I speak now?
If it's to the subject, absolutely.
Yes. First of all, that's not what it says in the Tanakh. Isaiah says...
I just read it to you from the Tanakh.
Sir.
Would you like me to read it in Hebrew? I just read it to you what Isaiah said. Those were his words.
Sir, you have the Holy Scriptures. I know you have a copy of it. JPS. And it says, by his wounds, by his stripes or wounds, we were healed. Not we are healed.
The Hebrew is Uvachavaraton near Palan. All right. Did I just read to you? All right, tell you what. Here's what we're going to do.
So, and once again, I'm not a big fan of trying to argue about translations of words. It's not my style to do that, because my whole premise of doing this is to try to force the Christian into a checkmate. Once again, if you're talking about a disagreement and a discrepancy about a word, then you're playing two different games, right? You're going for that stalemate again, right? Because you're not playing the same game. You're not agreeing on the premise of what is going on. So in the Tanakh, when I make arguments, I'm not going to try to play gatekeeper and be like, well, actually, the word lamo means that... Only if a Christian forces me into a corner and I have no other way of dealing with it because they're so dead set. Once again, that only ends in a stalemate. If you want to have a checkmate, you want to deal with something that a Christian agrees with you on. They agree with you on the translation. And you can see in my Zechariah 12:10 video that I do with Dr. Brown, that's how I force him into a checkmate with that. I'd love to be able to demonstrate. Maybe I'll call into a show and ask him that question. But like I said, by the end of this video, you should be able to call in to Dr. Brown's show and put him in checkmate. So hopefully one of you will do that. I encourage you to. That's the point of this channel, to empower you guys. Anyone can take down Dr. Brown. You don't got to be a rabbi.
We're going to do. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to read it to you now from a Jewish translation, from the JPS, all right, the most prestigious, respected Jewish translation. The Hebrew V'chavaraton nir palanu can be rendered, my doctoral dissertation was on the root rafal, which is used here, can be rendered, at the cost of his wounds, there is healing to us. It can be rendered, nir pa can either be rendered, we were healed or we are healed.
Now here's something interesting. I forgot that he talks about this in the video. This is really funny to me because in the previous video that I did, I talked about 2 Chronicles chapter 30, where it talks about Hezekiah giving a prayer, and then it says, remember, we talk about like his prayer giving atonement for the people, right? When they didn't sacrifice correctly, or they didn't eat the sacrifice according to as was written. And then it says, may the good Lord atone for anyone who has set his whole heart to seek God. the Lord God of his forefathers, though he be not clean according to the purity that pertains to holy things, right? It says that these people did not eat of the sacrifice as it is written according to the Torah. And it says, the Lord hearkened to Hezekiah's prayer, right? And healed the people. What word is used here? Bayirpa, right? The word that Dr. Brown did his dissertation on. So the word that you did your dissertation on, Dr. Brown, proves that prayer, independent of making an additional sacrifice in this case, right? Because the whole sin that they did was that they ate of the sacrifice not as written, according to Dr. Brown's perception on atonement and forgiveness, right? He's claiming that only through Jesus' blood can you be reconciled and forgiven and atoned for. Yet, here we have an example where the people are healed, right? That same word that's used in Isaiah 53, through prayer, independent of making an additional sacrifice. So, I wanted to throw that in there just to show that the word that Dr. Brown did his dissertation on, according to Second Chronicles chapter 30, verses 18 through 20, in verse 20, proves that the word healed can be used for God healing people through prayer and not necessarily independently through a sacrifice. So, interesting. Here it is, near pa. Same word, different form, but yeah. So, food for thought.
But I'm now going to read this from the new JPS version, okay? So Isaiah 53, I'm going to read the exact same verses here. And, it's hard to make a point when someone says 7 plus 7 equals 400. You say, okay, well, let's do the math. 7, now let's count, and each point is rejected. That's a little difficult. But let's try once more. Even if Joel is not going to hear what we're saying, maybe someone else will. So let's try this again, all right? Isaiah 53, I'm now reading from the new JPS. He was despised, shunned by men, a man of suffering, familiar with disease, as one who hid his face from us. He was despised, we held him of no account. And then it says, one who hid his face from us as a leper. He was despised, we held him of no account. Yet it was our sickness that he was bearing, our suffering that he endured. We accounted him plagued, smitten and afflicted by God. But he was wounded because of our sins, crushed because of our iniquities. He bore the chastisement that made us whole, and by his bruises we were healed. We all went astray like sheep, each going his own way, and the Lord visited upon him the guilt of all of us. He was maltreated, yet he was submissive. He did not open his mouth. Like a sheep being led to slaughter, like a ewe dumb before those who shear her, he did not open his mouth. By oppressive judgment he was taken away. Who could describe his abode? For he was cut off from the land of the living through the sin of my people who deserved the punishment. And his grave was set among the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no injustice and had spoken no falsehood. So let's try this one last time.
Sir, may I speak now?
Does it?
And of course we know that final verse that he read, the famous, he had done no wrong and had spoken no falsehood. We know that fits like a glove with the remnant once again in a chapter, Zephaniah. I mean, this really puts the Christian in their place when they try to say, oh, it can't refer to the remnant, right? Because it echoes almost 1-to-1, right? We just saw Psalms 44 earlier, how that echoes with the remnant and the sheep sheep to slaughter, right? Where it talks about how we're being killed all day long. Well, this is the cherry on top for all of that. Because when you look at Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 13, The remnant of Israel shall neither commit injustice nor speak lies, neither shall deceitful speech be found in their mouth. Man, how in the world can you look at that verse and then look at Isaiah 53:9 when it says he committed no violence and there was no deceit in his mouth, right? How can you look at that with a straight face and say, oh, can't be the remnant? It has nothing to do with the remnant. I don't care if you think it's a future prophecy, because it is a future prophecy in Zephaniah. But it fits with the remnant, right? No problem with it being future. But there's a problem with it only being about the Messiah when it speaks about the suffering servant in Isaiah 53. And we're going to exploit Dr. Brown's major weakness in this. We've already done it before, but I'm just going to... This is a comprehensive guide as to how to completely embarrass Dr. Brown on his show, should you choose to call in. I've already done the research. I already did the videos, right? You can look at my video where I call in about Isaiah 49, 3-6. Watch. I'll put the link in the description. Watch that video too if you want. I'm not going to go into as much detail on this one, but you'll see. I'll summarize it when we get to that point.
It say that he would die and be buried.
Well, from what you just read, it does.
Okay, great. So whatever happens after this must be resurrection.
If I may...
So see, exactly. So Joel eventually had to just admit if he would have just from the beginning admitted, okay, yes, it's about the servant dying and suffering for others on some level, instead of trying to fight that, then we wouldn't be in this position on the show. And then Dr. Brown wouldn't have dragged him through the mud, right? And once again, Joel, it's awesome that you called into the show. We're just trying to, make sure the next time I encourage you to call in again. And once again, anyone who watches this, call in again and just even the resurrection part. Like I said, we go to Ezekiel 37. That's fine. Resurrection is fine. It doesn't mean that it refers to Jesus. All we have to do is checkmate him and show that somebody other than the Messiah suffers and dies for the sins of others. That's all we have to do.
Speak. I will be quiet again, and hopefully you will allow me to speak eventually.
Joel, I'm just trying to get you to agree on what the text says. It first says he will die and be buried. Then it says he will prolong his days and see seed. That's what you call resurrection.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
All right.
May I speak?
Go for it.
See, that's what it ultimately ends up with. Don't be afraid of making it sound too Christian. You're going for the checkmate. You're not trying to take all their pieces off the board. I cannot stress that enough.
For it.
Thank you. That is all true. However, what Isaiah is talking about is not the Messiah. He is talking about the nation of Israel, the people. As you...
So, and I also don't like to phrase it that way. You say it's about Israel, Messiah included. At the very least, the remnant, right? Which includes the Messiah as well. So that's the way I would phrase it. Don't make it into this false dichotomy of, well, it's either the Messiah or it's Israel. The Messiah is a part of Israel. So include the Messiah in with the interpretation. Otherwise, you're going to deal with, but the rabbis and all this nonsense. So just accept these ideas and just show them that somebody other than just the Messiah is able to suffer and die for the sins of others. Then they have no reason to look at Isaiah 53 as a proof text for Jesus, because if somebody else is capable of doing, dying and suffering for the sins of other aside from just the Messiah, then why are they using Isaiah 53 to try and prove who the Messiah is? That's how you checkmate the Christian. Yes, the servant is Israel, so let's not back down from that.
No, Isaiah starts with chapter 1.
Wait, so your first objection was just a smokescreen, because you don't actually mean that. Why did you even bring that up then?
You asked me a question, sir. You asked me a question I didn't have an answer to. And on that question, you answered it for me, and I thank you for that.
All right.
Now, I'm trying to speak, and if you'll allow me to speak.
All right, so we answered the first one. It speaks of the Messiah's resurrection after death. But now you're saying it's not about the Messiah at all. Okay, so I answered the first. We demolished the argument. Now we go to the second. By all means, explain to me how this can be Israel dying for Israel's sins.
That is the key to destroying Dr. Brown's argument. He just told on himself. Explain to me how this can be Israel dying for Israel's sins. And look at his smug look on his face. Look, very simple. If you go to Ezekiel chapter 4, and I brought this up with my debate with Radar, right? He didn't even address it because it completely debunks the idea that Christians bring up when they say, how does Israel suffer for Israel? How do you make that make sense? Well, I guess you don't believe in the book of Ezekiel then, where it says in Ezekiel chapter 4, and you shall take yourself an iron skillet and make it an iron wall between you and the city and direct your face toward it. And it shall be in the siege and you shall besiege it, that it is a sign to the house of Israel. And you shall lie on your left side, and you shall place the iniquity of the house of Israel through it. The number of days you shall lie on it, you will bear their iniquity. What does the servant do? Bears the iniquity, right? When you go in Isaiah 53, right? The sins he bore, right? How does Israel suffer for Israel's sins? Well, he's also referencing here where it says in Isaiah 49, it says, he told me, you are Israel, my servant, about whom I will boast. And he said, I toiled in vain. I consumed my strength for naught in vanity. Surely my right is with the Lord, and my deed is with my God. And now the Lord who formed me from the womb as a servant, to be a servant to him and bring Jacob back to him. That's what he's referencing here. And Israel shall be gathered to him, and I will be honored in the eyes of the Lord, and my God was my strength. So, according to Dr. Brown, Israel isn't really Israel here. It's really secret code word for Jesus. As I've emphasized over and over again, this is the weakness of Dr. Brown's argument, is that Israel is never used to refer to the Messiah, son of David, anywhere in the Tanakh exclusively. This would be the sole exception, right? So it's really Dr. Brown who's going against the plain meaning of the text and his interpretation that this prophecy refers to only the Messiah, right? Because it's described in more glorious terms, right? It's saying, it's too light for you to be my servant to establish the tribes of Jacob and bring back the besieged of Israel, but I will make you a light of nations, that my salvation shall be until the end of the earth. I already debunked Dr. Brown on his position with that in my video in Isaiah 49:3. I'll put the link in the description again. I showed him how even the New Testament applies that to Paul and Barnabas in Acts chapter 13, and how the word Israel is used to apply to sinful Israel and to Jesus in Matthew chapter 2, verses 14 and 15, when he takes Isaiah 11:1 out of context. Out of Egypt I called my son. You can watch that video. Once again, I'll put it in the description, and that shows you how to and I literally called in a Dr. Brown show to demonstrate that. So definitely give that video a watch if you want to really know how to put Dr. Brown in his place on that. But we're going to come up to another point that I want to emphasize, that he sort of tells on himself with regards to this.
Yeah.
Isaiah starts with Isaiah 1. It doesn't start with 53.
Correct.
And on the servant doesn't start in 53. The servant starts long before that. You know well, sir, that the servant is referred to in both the singular and the plural. And in one sentence, Isaiah refers to the servant in both the singular and the plural.
No, that's false. In 41, in chapter...
You're telling me that it doesn't, in one sentence, it doesn't say...
In Isaiah, the servant of the Lord is mentioned roughly 17 times in Isaiah 41 up to 53:12. There it speaks of the singular servant. Sometimes it is the nation, which God says is blind, deaf, in exile because of its sins. Then it speaks of an individual who will redeem Israel from exile, who is righteous. That is the Messiah. That's why Isaiah 52:13, according to a prominent preacher, Rabbi Moshe Alshech, 500 years ago, Isaiah 52:13 said all of our rabbis understand that this refers to the Messiah.
So, yeah, of course, Dr. Brown is, obfuscating, the rabbis say this, taking rabbis out of context. Once again, don't fight him on the idea that the Mashiach is implicated in the servant of Isaiah 53. But do fight him on the idea that what he just said was where he said that first it starts out as this blind, blind and deaf and lying, deceitful servant, but then he claims that it is speaking of an individual, and he'll get more specific. He'll call out Isaiah 49:3, which we see explicitly here refers to Israel and not exclusively to the Messiah, son of David.
Well, that's you're giving me the view of one rabbi.
Well, I'm telling you what the text says. Starting in Isaiah 41, the servant of the Lord is spoken of as Israel, and then it's spoken of as one who, here, Isaiah 49, the servant has a mission to redeem Israel. Israel is...
What does 49:1 say?
The Lord spoke to me. It's an individual that the Lord spoke to me.
40 doesn't, I think it's 49:3. It says Israel.
So now we're talking about Isaiah 49:3 explicitly, right? Now, look at Dr. Brown's eyes. Look how excited he is. He's like, ooh, secret code word for Jesus. Israel doesn't really mean Israel here. It's an individual. Show me anywhere else in the Tanakh, Dr. Brown, where the word Israel is used to refer to the Messiah, son of David, and no one else. You can't. It doesn't exist. You're making up your own eisegetical, your nonsense, using your Jesus glasses and saying, oh, the servant is bringing back the nations. It can't refer to anyone other than Jesus because I was healed through Jesus because of your spiritual placebo, Dr. Brown. The nations aren't the only ones being healed. Israel is healed ultimately through the servant, which we already showed that Ezekiel is able to suffer for the sins of Israel and Judah. It says that I have given you the years and iniquity by the number of 3 days, and you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Israel. And it also says that he will bear the iniquity of the house of Judah. That's that. If you look at the Tanakh, that proves it, right? That's the end of it. One time I heard a Christian try to say, oh, well, that says it's a sign. It's a sign to the house of Israel. It's not really, happening that he's taking on the sins. Well, okay. Okay, fine. So it's a sign. So I guess in Isaiah 7:14, right, when it talks about, a woman is with child and she'll give birth to a son, that's the sign, right? I guess it's not she's not really giving birth to a son. It's just a sign. It's just a sign. It's not really happening, right? This never actually happened. It's just a sign. Just a sign. So it's a pathetic argument to try and, obfuscate, conflate, as usual. They don't have answers, so they have to make up inconsistent straw man arguments. So let's see what Dr. Brown has to say.
Israel is my servant.
And what does it say? It's speaking to an individual whose mission is to redeem the nation of Israel. He is called Israel like Jacob. That was his name. As you look at Ibn Ezra and the foremost rabbinic authorities, they say he represents Israel. There, they believe, Rashi, Ibn Ezra, that it is the prophet Isaiah that's being spoken of.
And that's all we need, right? That's all we need for the checkmate. If you look explicitly at Isaiah 49:3, he said to me, you are my servant, Israel, about whom I will boast. Well, who's me? It's Isaiah. Isaiah, if we're looking at the plain meaning of the text, Isaiah is that servant. So, you want to say it's about the Messiah too? Great, whatever, that's fine. But you can't tell me that it is exclusive to the Messiah and no one else. We just read in Ezekiel chapter 4, right? Sorry, I meant to go to Ezekiel here. In Ezekiel chapter 4, that Ezekiel bore the sins of Israel and Judah. You want to say it's a sign? Then Isaiah 7:14 is a sign, and it's not real, and it's just pretend, and it wasn't a real. This says explicitly that Israel can suffer for Israel. No problem here. It's not exclusive to the Messiah. It's not something only a supposed sinless man can do, right? Scripturally, Dr. Brown has 2 strikes against him at least. Number 1, Isaiah 49:3 says that Israel is the servant and not just the Messiah, right? Nowhere in the servant songs is Isaiah speaking of the servant referring exclusively to the Messiah, because it never says that the servant is of the Davidic lineage exclusively, or even that the servant is a king. Yet, if we go to Hosea 3:5, it says, David their king will come at the end of days after the final exile. Dr. Brown would have to agree that refers exclusively to the Messiah, son of David, and no one else. Same thing with Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 9. It says the exact same, almost the exact same language. It says, they will serve their God and David their king, whom I will set up for them. Interesting that it mentions the Lord their God and David their king separately from each other. And that it speaks about this happening after the final exile, right? After we are brought back from our distress, right? We will be saved. And that is when the Messiah will come. That's the timeline of the Messiah, not before the destruction of the second temple. None of that nonsense. And then, of course, in Ezekiel 37, we have the same thing. And as the caller, Joel, rightly pointed out, this future Davidic servant who will be king over them will also be ruling from the temple, which says, I will place my sanctuary in their midst forever. A covenant of peace with them, an everlasting covenant. Well, this is the new covenant that will happen after the final exile, not before the destruction of the second temple, as Dr. Brown would falsely have you believe. But you already knew that if you've been watching my videos.
So there are numerous...
Did Rashi believe Jesus was the Messiah?
No, of course not. He was a religious Jew.
Maimonides believed that Jesus was the Messiah.
Does the Pope believe that Muhammad is the true prophet? What does that prove?
Exactly. So why do you bring up Rashi? You're looking at him like, oh, what does that prove? Why do you bring up... You're obviously trying to obfuscate by even bringing up rabbinic commentaries, right? That disagree with you. That's Joel's point. So Joel is rightly calling you out for your shtus, for your shenanigans of trying to obfuscate instead of letting the text speak for itself.
The religious Jews, why would they? Of course I didn't believe that. All right, so here's what we learned. There are lots of objections that get thrown up all at the same time, and you demolish one, now you raise another that's equally weak. But for Joel's sake, because he's asking honest questions, we kind of come back and just take one more moment to explain the servant of the Lord in Isaiah. Here's the deal.
Okay, so we'll fast forward this.
I'm just going by what the Bible says. I'm bringing in rabbinic interpreters to say, by the way, many rabbis agree with this as well, with specific points that are being made. What's clear, Isaiah 53 speaks of the death and resurrection of the Messiah who died for Israel's sins. Read it again. It's so clear.
Zapier's automation is the easiest way to efficiently grow your business. Get a lead from a campaign. Automatic.
Thank God, only one ad. Okay.
Jacob, Israel. So explicitly,
we'll wind it just a little bit.
If you go through the book of Isaiah, start in chapter 41, and you'll see reference to my servant, Jacob, Israel. So explicitly, the servant is called Jacob, the servant is called Israel. And you'll see that God offers comfort to this servant, but says that his servant is blind and deaf. His servant is guilty of sin and has been sold into exile because of sin and is in prison and in darkness.
So I want you guys to really focus on what Dr. Brown is saying, because this is how you check. This is the key to the entire debate of how to checkmate Dr. Brown on his view on Isaiah 53. He's saying that in Isaiah 41, he's saying that the servant is referenced as Israel. Remember, we're in Isaiah 49 now, but he's talking about Isaiah 41. And he says that Israel is referred to as the servant. So right now, it says, you are my servant Jacob, who have chosen, Abraham who loved me, right? And you are my servant. And he's saying here that the servant is described as dumb, deaf, blind, sinful, right? Dr. Brown understands this servant as being not, basically being sinful and not really having any sort of merit in any sense, right? Now, look how he contrasts this.
Then you read about another servant, beginning in chapter 42, according to the Targum, the ancient Jewish translation, and according to Radak, one of the leading Jewish commentaries. This is speaking of the Messiah. And this servant is righteous and delivers the other servant, delivers Israel from exile.
So, in our understanding here, right? So, once again, there is no problem with the servant having some messianic context to it. There's no problem with that. The problem is when Dr. Brown, because what he's doing, he's taking rabbinic commentaries out of context and saying that, okay, well, this rabbi says it's about the Messiah. Great, but when it comes to Isaiah 53 and the servant songs of Isaiah, right, the rabbis are not saying that they are talking about a servant that is exclusive to the Messiah and no one else. It's just simply not how it is presented. And Dr. Brown is being deceitful by presenting it in such a way.
Delivers Israel from prison and darkness. Then you see the contrast get deeper as you go on. Isaiah 49, the servant is an individual who...
See, there you go. He says it's an individual. Yet it explicitly says in Isaiah 49, explicitly says that the servant is Israel. If I were to call into the show, I'd say, Dr. Brown, show me anywhere else where the word Israel is used to exclusively refer to the Messiah, son of David, and no one else. He won't be able to do it, I promise you. Call into the show. Ask him. The only exception would be his interpretation of Isaiah 49:3. Nowhere else. Yet, if you ask him, is this about the Messiah and no one else in Hosea 3:5? Yes, David their king, sure. Is this about the Messiah and no one else in Jeremiah 30 verse 9? Oh yeah, David their king, sure. Is this about the Messiah, son of David, and no one else? Ezekiel chapter 37 verse 24? Oh yeah, David their king, yeah. Coming at the end of days, building this, ruling in the sanctuary. Only about the Messiah. Where in the servant songs of Isaiah, anywhere from Isaiah 41 to Isaiah 53, where is the servant described as a Davidic king? Ever. Not once. That is the key. These are the pieces of the puzzle that you can present to Dr. Brown, calling into his show, challenging him on this. He has no standard for what is exclusive to the Messiah, son of David, and no one else. He also has no standard for who the righteous remnant is, because that's a huge hole in his argument, right? Because he's claiming that you have this dumb, deaf, blind servant, and then on the other hand, you have a sinless servant who can only be Jesus, no one else. Where does that put Isaiah? Is he a dumb, deaf, blind servant who lies and is deceitful? Why do you follow Isaiah, Dr. Brown, if he's the dumb, deaf, deceitful servant? He doesn't have any sort of merit as a prophet. He doesn't have a category for that because he's creating a false dichotomy, as you'll see.
Who represents Israel, who embodies the goals of Israel, whose whole mission is to regather the scattered tribes of Israel and to deliver them from exile. And again, this is a spiritual image, ultimately physical, the Babylonian exile, but ultimately spiritual. The 50th chapter, it's the individual righteous servant who suffers terribly. And then 52:13 to 53:12, this servant who will suffer terribly will be highly exalted. He will die for our sins. He will rise from the dead.
And once again, we discussed Isaiah 49 and Isaiah 50 in my previous video on Dr. Brown on this topic, where he discusses Isaiah 53. He tried to use the Targum, right, in Isaiah 49 to say, the Targum of Isaiah 52, 13, I believe, and he says, oh, look, it refers to the Messiah. But he also obfuscated the fact that it also refers to the remnant. Well, so too, if you look at the Targum of Isaiah 50 and Isaiah 49, they're consistent with the view that this is referring to, at the very least, the prophet, right, to Isaiah himself. And that's because it could just as well fit, right? Simply because the language speaks about somebody being, abused and hit, and being, oppressed by other people. What, you think Jesus is the only person that has any sort of dibs on that? I mean, look, Israel is under attack right now. Where there's righteous people in Israel being attacked now. This, I mean, it's mind-boggling that you're just going to ignore all the suffering of Israel over the past 2 millennia and say, no, only Jesus' suffering matters. Everyone else's suffering in the house of Israel, including Isaiah's suffering, Ezekiel's suffering, right? This doesn't matter. It was just pretend. It's just a pretend sign. He never really bore the sins of Israel and Judah. That's just pretend. Not real. Only Jesus' suffering matters. Everyone else, how dare you, Dr. Brown? How dare you make such a claim and try to invalidate and minimize the suffering of God's people, of his prophets? You have no explanation for the suffering of Ezekiel, bearing the sins of Israel and Judah. You yourself claim that the death of the high priest makes atonement for somebody in a city of exile, right? A city of refuge for unintentional manslaughter, right? You use that argument to say, oh, look, the rabbis believe in the death of the righteous atoning for sin. Well, guess what, Dr. Brown? That means that somebody aside from Jesus is able to die and atone for the sins of others, which means that point alone disproves the idea that only Jesus' death can atone for the sins of others. It proves that Isaiah 53 is about Israel and not just the Messiah. That's literally all we have to do to debunk your entire argument. See how this works, people? Dr. Brown tells on himself. This is the way you do it. You don't back away from the idea that Israel is the servant. You don't say, oh no, it's not talking about the death in Isaiah 53. It's only talking about prolonging of days. I get it, Joel. I understand it's uncomfortable because it sounds kind of Jesus-y. But here's the deal. This is the way to checkmate Dr. Brown. Just because you're saying things that Christians have reappropriated and abused and contextually tried to claim are, exclusive to Jesus, they're not. The children of Israel are going to be resurrected according to Ezekiel 37. We read that, the Valley of Dry Bones. We know this. It's not like Christians have some monopoly on resurrections and the death of the righteous atoning for sin. No, these are Jewish concepts, and they fit with Isaiah 53 referring to Israel and not just the Messiah. So let's embrace this, and this is how you beat Dr. Brown at his own game. He can quote as many rabbinic commentaries as he wants, but they're not going to help him because the rabbinic commentaries acknowledge rightly that Ezekiel's suffering on behalf of the nation was Israel suffering for Israel, right? I can show you the commentaries. It's Sanhedrin chapter 39, or Sanhedrin 39A or B. I'll make another video about it if we need to, but you guys can look that up. I'll put the link in the description if you need. But yeah, this is how you do it. Checkmate. He has nowhere to go. Why do you follow prophets, Dr. Brown, if Isaiah is just some dumb, deaf, blind, deceitful prophet?
Isaiah 53 cannot speak of the nation as a whole, because the nation as a whole was guilty and therefore in exile. So how could that servant be called righteous? The servant is explicitly called righteous and makes others righteous.
Right, so that's exactly why when you look at Isaiah 49, once again, and I'm emphasizing this because I want you guys to know so you can call into his show and you can put him in his place. You are my servant Israel about whom I boast. Okay, so let's say this is referring to Isaiah, right? Because that's the most clear, plain reading of the text. And he's part of the righteous remnant, right? And I said, I toiled in vain, I consumed strength for naught and vanity. Surely my right is with the Lord and my deed is with God. So let's say Isaiah tried to give this word out and then people weren't listening to it. And so the Lord God who formed me in the womb to be a servant to him, to bring back Jacob to him, and Israel to be gathered to him, I will be honored in the eyes of the Lord, and my God was my strength. So what's going to happen is Isaiah's words are going to resonate with other people in the nation to bring them back to God, and eventually they're going to come back and keep the Torah, and they will be gathered, right? Now, after this happens, after the nation of Israel is reconciled and brought back to its former glory, starting with the remnant, inclusive of at least Isaiah, we already showed that Ezekiel was able to suffer for the sins of others as well, so we can include Ezekiel in there. If you look at the parallel language here, who formed me in the womb to be a servant to him and bring Jacob back to him, that fits very well with Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 1 says the same thing about Jeremiah, right? There's so many parallels, it's insane, right? It even says, when I had not yet formed you in the womb, I knew you. When you had not yet emerged from the womb, I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. What does it say about Isaiah 49:3, this servant Israel, who formed me in the womb to be a servant to him, to bring back not just Israel, it says, you will be a light of nations. Of course, no, it can only be Jesus. Only Jesus can bring back the nations. Okay, you can throw out the book of Jeremiah. Only Jesus could suffer for the sins of others. Okay, throw out the book of Ezekiel. Christians don't have anything. Oh, throw out Numbers too, because the death of the high priest also atones for sin, Dr. Brown, as you rightly admit. But it undoes your entire argument that the servant, only a sinless servant, can atone for the sins of others. Who are you fooling, Dr. Brown?
If it was national Israel in exile, it's only because of sin. If national Israel was righteous, national Israel would be in the land, blessed by God. You say, no, it's the righteous remnant. But according to the scriptures, if you look in the prophets, the suffering of the righteous remnant, suffering unfairly at the hands of the nations, brought judgment on the nations. It didn't bring salvation. It didn't bring deliverance.
Once again, you can throw out the book of Isaiah too, because it says that ultimately Israel's suffering will bring healing to the nations. You jumped the gun, Dr. Brown, right? You are claiming that, remember, look at the chronology of this. It says first the servant, who is the remnant, right? As we established, at least Isaiah is going to bring back the rest of Israel first, and then they will serve as a light to the nations. You're claiming, oh, well, the Gentiles have to be saved first. Who says that they have to be saved first? Where does Scripture say that the Gentiles are going to receive the salvation before the Jews, and that the rest? It doesn't say that. If we look in Zechariah chapter 12, as I emphasize over and over again, it says that the Gentiles are going to come up against Jerusalem. Right? They're not going to receive their healing until after this final battle. It says all the nations are going to come up against Jerusalem. And then we have Israel is under attack right up here. I did a whole video on Zechariah 12. You're going to tell me, oh, the nations are already healed with Jesus. It already happened. Yeah. Well, then tell me how Zechariah chapter 14, verse 16 is going for you. It will come to pass that everyone left of the nations who came up against Jerusalem will go up from year to year to prostrate himself to the King, the Lord of hosts, to celebrate the festival of tabernacles. This has not happened yet. And it shall be that whoever of all the families of the earth does not go up to Jerusalem to prostrate himself to the King, the Lord of hosts, upon them there shall be no rain, meaning that it will not be until after this final war that the nations will truly know the God of Israel, right? That is when the healing will happen, not before the destruction of the second temple, not with the death of Jesus on the cross, none of that shtus. It will happen paralleled again in Zechariah chapter 8, where it says, all the nations are going to come to Jerusalem, and they will come to the Jews, saying, let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. Has nothing to do with Jesus. Jesus didn't fulfill any of these prophecies. Who are you fooling, Dr. Brown?
So it's quite the contrary. It is speaking explicitly of the Messiah. Then when you have reference to servants plural, that starts in Isaiah 54:17. Kol kli yitzar laich lo yitzlach v'kol hashon tekumi tach lemishpat tarshi zot nachalat avdei Adonai v'tzid kanta me'iti. You know the passage, no weapon formed against you will prosper. This is the heritage of the servants. Now you have this after the work of the servant in 53:12.
Right, so he's talking about Isaiah 54, right, where it speaks of the servants in the plural. Fine, but once again, Isaiah 49, 3-6 is really where this all breaks down. That is speaking about Israel being the servant. So that's enough for us to prove. Now, once again, it is not, when we say that Israel is the servant, we're not saying it's not about the Messiah, right? We're simply saying that the Messiah is included within the remnant. So yes, Isaiah initially starts out as that remnant, but ultimately in this era, right, the Mashiach will come, will be a part of that remnant that's going to be attacked, right? We talk about that in Zechariah chapter 12, right? Among them is going to be David, right? The house of David is going to be attacked and will prevail and ultimately will be saved by God. That's what it says in Zechariah chapter 12. And this prophecy, Israel under attack, pray for the peace of Jerusalem, so that this will ultimately happen. On that day, the Lord shall protect the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and the weakest of them on that day shall be like David, and the house of David will be like angels, like the angel of the Lord before them. Right? And we already looked at Zechariah 12:10 and how Dr. Brown's understanding of this makes absolutely no sense, because it's the house of David who is going to be looking upon and mourning, right? Whatever this pierced entity refers to, right? We understand this as referring to our fallen brethren in Israel, the suffering servant, right? That is how we understand this. Why would Jesus' suffering be the only suffering that matters? How dare any Christian claim that Zechariah 12:10 refers to Jesus being pierced, and that we're going to be mourning about somebody who supposedly conquered death, and that what in the world? That makes no sense. We're mourning about the deaths of our fellow Israelites. That's what this is about. And the Messiah will be among them, because the Messiah is a part of the house of David. The Messiah is not getting pierced. The Messiah, son of David, is not, it doesn't say David, their God, will be pierced, chas v'sholom. It says David, the whole house of David, will be mourning after these atrocities take place. That's what it says in Zechariah 12:12. No way around that, Dr. Brown.
12. All right, let us go to...
So, okay, that's that. At the end of the day, Dr. Brown has no reason to follow any prophet, because the prophets are all dumb, deaf, and blind, and deceitful according to his understanding of Isaiah, the servant songs of Isaiah, because only Jesus can be the sinless prophet, the sinless servant who... is described in Isaiah 49, he claims is sinless, even though it says that Ezekiel was able to take on the sins of others, and that Isaiah is explicitly being spoken of in Isaiah 49, 3-6. But Whatever. I guess Dr. Brown does not believe in a righteous remnant of Israel because they're all just dumb, deaf, blind, deceitful people. Chas v'shalom, Dr. Brown. May you come to know the truth of Hashem. May you come back to Torah. May the true Mashiach come and save us from all of this stress, all of this atrocities happening here in Israel. May Zechariah 12 ultimately come to fruition. May the house of David be saved. May the house of Judah be saved. May all of Israel be saved. Bimheira v'yameinu, speedily in our days. Shalom Aleichem.